In 1963, 15 men waited in the dark, poised for one of the most audacious crimes in British history. The robbery would take place on a lonely stretch of track outside Cheddington in Buckinghamshire. Their target was a Royal Mail train carrying over £2 million in cash. As the train approached, a red signal light forced it to a sudden halt. But what the gang didn't know was that their plan was about to hit an unexpected twist, one that would change everything. What happened next would capture the imagination of the public for decades. No guns, just grit and guile, but also a little bit of violence and a plan that wasn't quite as flawless as it seemed. This is the story of the Great Train Robbery, a tale of cunning, luck, and a chain of mistakes that ultimately led to the gang's downfall. But what exactly went wrong, and how did the gang's perfectly laid plans begin to unravel? The Great Train Robbery of 1963 is one of the most famous crimes in British history. A gang of 15 London criminals hijacked a train and stole over £2 million in used banknotes. The same amount today would be equivalent to about £40 million. The train they targeted was a traveling post office train that left Glasgow for Euston on the night of August 8, 1963, following a route that took it through places like Leighton Buzzard and Sears Crossing before arriving in London. The train carried a high-value package carriage, which unusually contained £2.3 million due to a bank holiday weekend in Scotland. Little did they know that this unexpected fortune would bring them both their greatest triumph and their greatest mistake. However, it was not only the huge amount of money stolen that ensured their notoriety, but the real twist was still to come, something that would forever define this heist as one of the boldest yet flawed operations in British crime history. The heist was also seen by many sections of the popular British press as a highly romantic, flamboyant act on the part of the London underworld. In particular, gang member Ronnie Biggs came to be regarded as a swashbuckling figure who had flouted the authorities and got away with it. One central feature of the robbery that appealed to the public was that no guns were used, although, in actual fact, the robbery was a violent crime since the train driver was hit over the head with an iron bar and was permanently injured. This unpleasant reality was, in some quarters, conveniently forgotten, and in time the train robbers became working-class heroes who were regarded with a great deal of affection by the British public. The gang was led by a man named Bruce Reynolds, who planned the operation from the beginning. Born in 1931 in London, Reynolds grew up during the tough times of World War II, which shaped much of his early life. From a young age, he was drawn to a life of crime, starting with petty thefts before moving into larger, more organized crimes. He was known for his meticulous nature and ability to plan complex operations. Before the Great Train Robbery, Reynolds had already made a name for himself in the criminal underworld, orchestrating several high-profile heists. By day, he posed as an antiques dealer, a cover that let him mingle with London's elite, cruise around in an Aston Martin, and enjoy a life of apparent affluence. He enjoyed the finer things in life, from luxury cars to expensive clothes, and had a reputation for being charming, yet elusive. Reynolds was motivated by a desire for the thrill of the heist as much as the money, and he saw the Great Train Robbery as his chance to pull off the ultimate score. But would Reynolds's thirst for the ultimate thrill be his downfall? The frontman for the gang was John Weeder, a solicitor with an upper-class background who rented the farmhouse where the gang hid after the heist. Next was Buster Edwards, an ex-boxer turned con man, later immortalized by Phil Collins in the film Buster. Other gang members included Charlie Wilson, a bookmaker, and two big men known as Gordon Goody and Jimmy Hussey, the brawn of the operation. Last but not least was the youngest member of the gang, Ronnie Biggs, who as yet had little experience of criminal life. The operation was meticulously planned, using information about the times large amounts of cash were carried on postal trains going in and out of London. Yet, even the most meticulous plans can't predict every outcome. There was a problem waiting for them, and it would be a costly one. The train's transit route included key locations like Leighton Buzzard and Sears Crossing, making it an ideal target. A quiet site outside Cheddington in Buckinghamshire was selected, so that the robbers could flag down the train and bag the money without attracting too much attention. The site was also chosen because it was near a military base, where large supply vehicles often traveled around. In this way, the robbers hoped that their movements would not arouse suspicion. On the 8th of August, 1963, a few minutes after 3 o'clock in the morning, the raid began. Wearing railway workers' overalls, the gang rigged up some temporary signals on the line, using a 6-volt battery to power the red light. Seeing the false red signal ahead, the driver, Jack Mills, brought the train to a halt. What happened next would shock even the robbers themselves and set the tone for the chaos to come. When it stopped, the co-driver, David Whitby, climbed out of the diesel engine to find out what the problem was. Whitby was pulled off the track by Buster Edwards, and once he realized that a robbery was in progress, he did not try to resist. However, when the driver, Jack Mills, then got off, other members of the gang attacked him with iron bars, causing him to bleed from the head. Mills collapsed on the side of the track. This was not a part of the plan, as they didn't want to hurt anyone, but now, with a gravely injured driver, the gang had to think fast, and that's when things really started to go wrong. More mistakes were made as the train robbers began to panic. They had brought in a retired train driver, enlisted by Ronnie Biggs, to move the train into position so the mailbags could be easily unloaded. However, the elderly train driver struggled with the modern train's controls and couldn't move it. With time ticking and the plan spiraling out of control, the gang had to make a snap decision that would either save their heist or doom them. Jack Mills, despite his injuries and still bleeding, had no choice but to take over and drive the train into position. The robbers then quickly formed a human chain, unloading over 100 sacks of money before making their getaway. The gang hid out at a nearby farmhouse, Leatherslade Farm. It was here, in this secluded and unassuming location, that they tried to lie low after their audacious heist. The farmhouse became their temporary sanctuary, where the tension of the operation seemed to dissipate into the routine of everyday activities. They drank cups of tea and played the board game Monopoly, allegedly using real banknotes from their haul as money, an anecdote that added an almost absurd humor to the story of the Great Train Robbery. The irony of using actual stolen cash to play a game about accumulating wealth was not lost on them. It was perhaps a reflection of the thrill they sought beyond just financial gain. But their moment of triumph would soon come back to haunt them in the most unexpected of ways. This sense of careless triumph, however, was soon to prove their downfall. The gang, feeling a false sense of security, had become complacent. They laughed, joked, and left traces of their presence all over the farmhouse. The Monopoly board, covered in fingerprints, was found along with many other items that clearly showed they had been there. When the police eventually found the farmhouse, the gang had already left. But they had left something behind, something that would turn their temporary victory into a permanent downfall. But the chaos they left behind would eventually betray them. Fingerprints were on teacups, furniture, and the board game itself. It was this careless disregard for detail that allowed the police to start putting names to faces, identifying many of the men involved, most of whom were already known criminals with long records. And the more the police uncovered, the more the gang's once brilliant plan began to look like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. The irony of playing Monopoly with real banknotes came to symbolize both the arrogance and the naivety of the gang. They had pulled off one of of the most audacious crimes in British history, but had forgotten that their greatest threat lay not in the heist itself, but in the details they left behind. It was as if the farmhouse bore witness to their fleeting moment of glory, a monument to both their success and their ultimate failure. Eventually, 13 of the 15 gang members were apprehended and brought to justice. The gang received a total of 307 years imprisonment between them, but for some of the gang members, the story didn't end there. What followed were escapes, pursuits, and years on the run that would become almost as famous as the robbery itself. Bruce Reynolds spent 5 years on the run before the police finally caught up with him. He was then tried and received a prison sentence, of which he served 10 years. Buster Edwards fled to Mexico, but later gave himself up and ended up running a flower stall at Waterloo Station. Charlie Wilson made a daring escape from prison while serving his sentence, living quietly outside Montreal, Canada, for a time until police traced him via a telephone call his wife made to her parents in England. Ronnie Biggs also made a dramatic escape from jail after serving over a year of his sentence. However, living life as a fugitive is not as glamorous as it seems, and Biggs would eventually find that out the hard way. He fled to Brazil via Spain and Australia, where he lived for decades before eventually returning to the UK in 2001. He underwent plastic surgery, traveled around the world, and then settled in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. In his later years, Biggs became notorious as the one great train robber to avoid capture, even though his initial role in the robbery had been a small one. However, in his later years he became ill, having suffered several strokes, and grew tired of living abroad. He announced his intention to come back to Britain, even if he risked being imprisoned in his bad state of health. When he returned, he was duly apprehended. In the end, most of the great train robbers were brought to justice. However, despite the massive haul, none of the thieves managed to live comfortably on their ill-gotten gains. The money stolen in the robbery was never recovered. Thank you for watching this episode of True Gangster Stories. The Great Train Robbery may have been an incredible tale of ambition and audacity, but it also showed how even the most well-planned heist can unravel due to small mistakes. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about the rise and fall of notorious criminals, make sure to subscribe to True Gangster Stories, hit the like button, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Stay tuned for more gripping tales from the world of crime.